I'm Alan Gerson. I've lived in New Orleans. I'm third generation New Orleans. My grandmother was born here, and I've lived here all my life, except for 4 years in Boston in 70 to 74. But otherwise, I've been here. And what was the other question?
And what is your role in New Orleans? How do you?
Oh, I'm an artist, and I manage some real estate that my family owns. But primarily, I'm an artist. I was a lawyer for a while, but I gave that up. But now I'm just an artist.
So I'm very curious about how you would describe your work. I've looked at some of the stuff online. The students all researched everybody. So
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have a little bit of a sense of you, but I'm curious how you describe it.
Well, it's a kind of magic realism. It's a world that I paint that has similarities to the real world, but has a slight unreal quality to it as well, though everything is usually painted fairly realistically. Although, that's not always true. Sometimes I just do pure realism. But it's usually got a kind of a twist to it. So kind of a magical realist, I guess.
And there were commentaries in quite a few of the projects I looked at. The one that stands out right now, I think because you just said you had been a lawyer, are the scales that you did. Would you talk a little bit about those influences?
Being a lawyer?
Being a lawyer or politically, what is?
Well, I don't think my work is generally very political, but I did do a series of watercolors about the legal profession. I still do occasional ones. I was a lawyer for 3 years, and I practiced labor law at McGlinchey, Stafford. I don't know what it's even called now. And then I went to another smaller firm, and then I realized I just hated being a lawyer, so I went back to being an artist. Earlier in the 80s, I had been the visual arts director at the Contemporary Arts Center. And I don't know why I became a lawyer, but I did. And when I quit being a lawyer, I immediately went back to being an artist.
So if you would tell me a little bit about sort of art and how you were working with art in the 80s and the 90s, so the pre-Katrina area and then...
Well, in the 80s, like I said, I was at the Contemporary Arts Center and also doing my own work. And I was there from 80, I think, to 85. And then I went to law school. But I was primarily a printmaker when I got my master's degree in printmaking. So I mostly did etchings, but I kind of got away from it after law school and pretty much confined myself to painting, which is what I do now. And my first show was about lawyers, and then subsequently I've had other kinds of themes in my shows. A lot of times my shows have some kind of connective thing, although my most recent show is just recent works, so there's no particular theme to it. But I was thinking the other day, I've had about every 2 years since 1991, I've had a show. So I was trying to figure out how many that is. What is that, 26 years? So I guess about 12, 13 shows, one-person shows since then. And that's really what I confine myself to. I don't enter any competitions anymore. I don't even really seek gallery representation anywhere. So I have had a couple shows in New York, and I was represented by a gallery in California and Miami, a couple other places. But really, New Orleans is where I do my work and where I show it.
So, New Orleans, your family's been here and you've been
My
three
father,
generations in.
my father and his mother were both natives.
So tell me a little bit about New Orleans, having been...
What do you mean?
what's New Orleans like? This project is primarily, I don't know if I told you this. It started several years ago. Friends of mine who lived here said they wanted to talk about New Orleans through their voice instead of being represented by the media.
Oh.
And so I said, okay, well, I'll try to do that. And so, what is New Orleans to you? And
Can you be more specific?
What would you want people who are not from here to know about a place that...
Oh, well, it's what everybody says. New Orleans is not just the French Quarter and Bourbon Street, that it's a old, rich environment for arts and all kinds of things. Doesn't have a perfect history, but it's colorful. It's a great place to be an artist because it used to not be so expensive to get an apartment, and there's a lot of like-minded people here, and they pretty much leave you alone. And the city kind of, welcomes artists and the artist type, I think. And since Katrina, there's been a lot of good artists, and people have come to New Orleans. Katrina wasn't worth it, but it did have that benefit to bring a lot of new, interesting people into the city, and people who had an appreciation for the kind of secret society New Orleans is. It's everybody's got their groups of people, and everybody's got their little circles, and within circles. So it's a series of villages more than a city, New Orleans.
So are you referring to the neighborhoods and the communities, or are you referring to like crews and things? I'm not sure.
No, I'm talking about neighborhoods and groups of people, although some, I guess, Mardi Gras crews, revolve around people who've known each other, but that's not really what I was talking about. It's, there's all kinds of things that New Orleanians know about, festivals and, St. Joseph Day altars and, all kinds of little, secret societies in the city. They're not really secret, but the people who are members of them know about them. And I don't even know where I was starting from.
Okay, so let me ask you, why did you stay in New Orleans post-Katrina?
Fuck them. I'm not leaving. It never occurred to me not to stay. I have to, that did not occur to me. I don't know what else to say except, I didn't think of moving, but I think it was also people's duty to stay and rebuild. And I have nothing but disdain for people who left, except for maybe old people and people with infants. But otherwise, I think people should have stayed if they could economically. And I think they taught their children a bad lesson if they left. That loyalty and duty and responsibility are not as important as your own selfish needs. So I call them traitors.
So have you been part of a lot of the rebuilding efforts?
No, I had my own problems. But in that, I was part of the rebuilding effort.
Right.
But my family has properties, and so, I spent years getting those back online and in shape. And my own studio had 6.5 feet of water, so that took a while, and it was very, very hard.
Has this taken away from your art process or added to it?
Once I was back in, working, I don't know that it really had any effect that you could see in my work. I guess I did a couple pieces that were related to it, but personally, I don't think it had any huge swerve in my way of doing art. But then I'm sort of a studio painter, and once I had my studio back, it kind of just went on as it was. although, things were different. But for me, I didn't do any huge Katrina pieces or anything like that.
So this intersection of real and magic, or real and imaginary, is that at all influenced by this location?
Oh, by this location in New Orleans?
Geographically?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think, just being in New Orleans can be a magical experience, even if you've lived here all your life. You still get those kind of days or moments, when you just, it's magical, it's just, you feel nostalgic even though you're there, so, no, I think that's true. And, yeah, no, I think that's had an effect. I mean, in some ways, New Orleans is realistic in that it accepts that people are not perfect and they're going to do imperfect things, and we have occasions to allow them even to do things, which I think is different from most places. In New Orleans, you don't even give really maybe a second look. Somebody riding on a bike painted silver down the street, it's just, that's what happens in New Orleans. It's like a Fellini film, but in New Orleans. But the thing is about Fellini is, the more I have looked at Fellini films over the years, he seems like a hyper-realist more than a fantasist. That's my take on it. And the more I have looked at his work over the years, like 8.5, it's a strange kind of editing, but the characters, even though they seem overblown, are real. They seem very real to me. And maybe that's because I'm from New Orleans. I mean, I guess maybe they seem more outlandish to people who come from more staid environments. But I think, that kind of Mediterranean attitude is similar to New Orleans, I guess, through the Caribbean. But, yeah. I think we feel more at home in those kinds of places when you come from New Orleans than if you came from Dayton, Ohio, or someplace.
Or Minnesota.
Yeah, or Minnesota. Well, it was just an example.
Yeah.
Everywhere else except for a few major cities.
When you said that, I was just thinking of a colleague of mine who says, "Oh, we're from Minnesota. We'd be too polite to say something like that."
Yeah, right.
And I never know if I've been rebuked or if...
Are you from here?
I lived here for 8 years.
Oh.
I actually moved to take a job near my husband's family in Syracuse in 2001.
It's too cold for me.
It's really cold right now. We've got 3 feet of snow.
You can have it.
So, do you have kids?
No.
Is
I have a
there
French bulldog.
What's a French bulldog?
We saw the picture online, didn't we?
Oh.
I did see the picture online.
What is it?
What's
It's
a French bulldog mean?
It's a breed of Frenchies.
Oh, so you have a French bulldog.
I have a French.
And that's your dog. That's your kid.
That's our kid.
Geez, I'm a little dense sometimes. All right.
My wife and I.
Is there a 4th generation?
There is from my brother and sister, although her son doesn't live here, but 2 of my brother's children, one of them lives here.
And so there is a rich...
There's a 5th generation.
There's a 5th generation.
Right.
There's a rich history here. Do you feel very connected to that through your family ties?
Yeah, through the Jewish New Orleans experience, I do. Up until the 50s and 60s, we were pretty much kept out of the high society and all those things. Still there. I don't know if there are still Mardi Gras crews that don't let Jews in. They may not say it, but they're not in there. I don't worry about it, though. It doesn't bother me in the least. But, that's just the way the world is. But I do feel, I feel deeply a part of New Orleans, and especially after Katrina, because if there was any doubt in my mind about living here for the rest of my life, Katrina dispelled it, because there would have been a perfect opportunity to move, but there was no other place I wanted to move to, so I stayed. And plus, it would have, it'd been wrong to leave a place when it's on its knees, which is what a lot of people did. And people forget, but we weren't welcomed into people's arms after Katrina. Like in Baton Rouge and other places in Louisiana, we were just, the swarthy hordes coming to, mess up their little safe worlds. And plus Baton Rouge, I remember they were, kind of acting like, well, this is our chance. We're going to get all those businesses from New Orleans to move here now. They tried too. I won't ever forget that. That's why when they had those floods last summer, in Baton Rouge, I felt sorry for them up to a point. I said, well, now you're seeing.
So do you have connections to Baton Rouge or Lafayette or any of the other?
Oh, Lafayette, I have some friends there. Not really that I know of in Baton Rouge. I have friends who live in and around the area of Lafayette. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I usually give other folks a chance to ask questions.
Oh, good.
If
Sure.
that's okay with you.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like how you became an artist, or you started.
Well, that is kind of a tortuous road. I always had talents at drawing, but that always doesn't translate into becoming an artist. But and I fought against it. I got my undergraduate degree is in philosophy, and I didn't take any art courses when I was in Boston University, which had a very good fine arts department with Philip Guston there at the time when I was there. And of course, I'm not taking art because it's too easy. So I didn't take advantage of that, and I got my degree in philosophy. And then when I came out and I came back to New Orleans, I started deciding, well, I thought I was going to be a writer, but you can't escape your own talents. So my talents didn't really lay in that direction. It would always end up being visual arts. So I kind of succumbed to it and started taking adjunct classes at Tulane, and then I got my master's at UNO and became a full-time serious artist. And then I was at the CAC, and I was an arts administrator for several years and organized shows, and that was, it was fun, but it was a very hard job. And then I went to law school and became a lawyer, and I think after that is when I realized, stop fighting it. You're not going to be anything else but an artist, so just do the art. And that's pretty much what I've done.
Do you feel like you were exposed to a lot of art? It just seems like such a creative.
Oh yeah, New Orleans is very, you can see a lot of art. As I've gotten older, I go to fewer and fewer openings and shows, but there's a lot to see here, and there's Julia Street and St. Claude and Magazine, and there's a lot of galleries. When I first started, when the CAC, I was there, I think in the second and third year, there was one contemporary art gallery in New Orleans, the Stern Gallery. I think it was actually called something else before that, and that was the only really contemporary art gallery. And then after the CAC came, the artists in the town started coalescing a lot more and realizing there were a lot more artists and people interested in arts, and galleries started opening. Magazine Street had more serious artists back then, galleries back then. And then they moved to Julia Street preceding the World's Fair in '84. And that whole area has been developed since then. And so now that's where a lot of galleries, it used to be in the Quarter really, in the old days. That's where that's where all the galleries were and the artists. And now there is a nice contemporary art scene that's not schlocky and tourist oriented in the Quarter. for a long time, that's all you could get in the quarter was, the tourist crap. But now that's changed, I think. And I guess there are some galleries in Marigny, but I don't really know. But St. Claude, and all that kind of has been since, I'd say, maybe 1980 when the CAC, really fully opened and the arts community kind of started coalescing. And it's a very organized, although I'm not so involved in it except for my shows, it's a pretty cohesive gallery and art scene in New Orleans, more so than I think in other cities with the same number of artists and groups, because the gallery openings are coordinated, so there's a lot more people now, so it may not be as organized as I'm imagining it, but it's pretty cohesive. People know what's going on, and they, you get the feeling in New York, places like that, if you're not at a certain level, you don't exist, even though there's so many artists in New York, but they all kind of struggle in their own little units. But I think in New Orleans, it's a more friendly atmosphere and easier to become immersed in the community, because it is kind of a community. I don't think it is in some other places, but then I'm not really familiar. My impression of a place like New York was that, there are lots of artists, but there's not it's not a community. It's almost too big to, but I don't know, Los Angeles, I don't know, but my sense is that it's not so much of a community there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you made the, sorry, I was
No, go ahead, yeah.
when you made the full go of becoming an artist, when did you kind of realize that you could make a living off it? And before that?
Never.
Never.
Marrying a lawyer is my advice.
Your wife's a lawyer still.
I can't say I couldn't live in abject poverty off of my art, but I'm the exception to the rule. I was lucky, I married a lawyer and had some money, but it's hard to make a living as an artist unless you're one of those select few that, many are called but few are chosen. So you can make a living of a sort, I think, but couldn't live the way I'm living. But that wouldn't have stopped me anyway. I was prepared to, whatever may come. But we didn't have children, so my wife was, she was much happier with me as an artist than as a lawyer. It was, I could do it, and I was, got good jobs as a lawyer, but I just hated every minute of it. And I knew from the first day I went in that I'd made a mistake. It took me 3 years to admit it. But better late than never. I was a hero to a lot of lawyers in the city for a long time. People who I didn't know say, "Oh, you're that guy that quit." Yeah, because I just went in one day and I said, I can't do this anymore, and I'm leaving. I'm giving you my 1 month or whatever it was notice. And for a few months after, I felt like I was floating. I was so happy and unoppressed. I can't tell you how much I hated being a lawyer. When my wife Beth talks about it, I get this curdling inside of me. God, I'm so glad I'm not doing this, and I'm so sorry you have to do it. But she kind of likes being the lawyer things, not so much firm politics and stuff, but research and stuff. I hated every aspect of it. I was good at the kind of on my feet sort of stuff, but I hated it.
Being an artist really feels kind of like the exact opposite.
It is the exact opposite. I felt like a Siamese twin, but in one body. Yeah, I did like 3 or 4 Siamese twin paintings at the time, too. Yeah. Yeah, my advice is don't become a lawyer. I did get a series of watercolors and a book out of it, so that was at least something. And I still do some of those watercolors. My wife we put together calendar. She does that every year of some aspect of my work, and this year she happened to do the lawyer things on the calendars. I meant to bring one, but I forgot. We don't sell them or anything. She just does it for friends.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you wanted to say? This, as an oral history, I typically...
Well, I would say the people who stayed in New Orleans and worked at it, and even if they weren't in big, giant community organizations or anything, but just your own little day-to-day life, getting that... I mean, that's how it came back, is people, individuals, doing individual things, even if it was for their own selfish reasons to get themselves back up. They stayed and did it. You know, they'd smelled the mold, they pulled out the rotten plaster, you know, not like these people that left and abandoned the city and assumed it was never going to come back. Yeah. I haven't forget Hastert either, from Illinois. He was the Speaker of the House and said they shouldn't, why bother rebuilding New Orleans? It's only going to happen again. So all his troubles, I'm having schadenfreude. Yeah, I don't forget those things. Yeah.
Well, we're certainly glad you stayed, and
Thanks.
everybody else did.
Yeah, no, it was important, and at the time I felt it was important, and I would get so aggravated at these people who just picked up and left us. Don't you have any loyalty? Don't you, you know, what are you doing? You know, and they'd say, well, it's for the children. Well, you know, it's not for the children. The children are learning that when something happens and it's tough, you get up and leave and abandon the problem. That's the overall overarching lesson that was taught to those people. But the people who stayed, they, you know, I think they have a stronger sense of community of New Orleans. I know I do, with all its problems. You know, after Katrina, I mean, I was cemented in place. You know, after it dried, I wasn't ever going to leave again. You know, and you know, I used to think about, well, you should move to New York, you should blah, blah, blah. But after that, I realized it doesn't matter. You know, I'm staying here. That's me, noble and wonderful.